reunion with Alex happened at the police station. My husband was arrested as a client in a prostitution bust, and Alex was the team leader overseeing the operation. Alex asked me, "Do you regret it?" I told him, "Never." The moment I finished speaking, I was suddenly slapped by my mother-in-law, Amy, who rushed into the police station. The force of the slap was heavy, and the taste of blood instantly filled my mouth. The surrounding officers quickly intervened, separating me from Amy. Alex stepped forward, positioning himself between us. His voice was low and stern, "This is a police station. Please, mind your manners." Amy glared at me with malice. "If you weren't such a dead fish with no charm, my son would never have gone out to hire a prostitute. You can't even do the basic thing of spreading your legs. What kind of woman do you think you are? You might as well die with your mother." Her words were harsh, and a female officer grabbed my arm, signaling me to follow her. She led me to a small meeting room and poured me a cup of hot water. "I'm sorry, don't be too upset." Her words were weak, and she clearly didn't know how to comfort me. "I'm fine, thank you." I smiled and held the disposable cup in both hands. "Could you tell me where the restroom is?" I touched my burning right cheek. My lip stung, probably torn. "I need to take care of my injury." She immediately understood, offering to get a first aid kit and asked me to wait. She seemed to pity me, which was understandable. First, I found out my husband was arrested for soliciting sex, paid the bail, and now, my mother-in-law slapped me in public and insulted me. My dignity had been stomped into the ground, even the stray dogs passing by could offer me a sympathetic glance. But honestly, I felt fine. Perhaps I had become numb from life's constant blows. My face hurt, but my heart remained completely still. In fact, I was even thinking about what I should eat later. I was getting a bit hungry. With that thought, I took out a candy from my pocket, just unwrapped it, and was about to put it in my mouth when the door to the meeting room opened again. Alex stood at the doorway, holding a first aid kit in one hand and an ice pack in the other. His expression calm and indifferent as he looked at me. I hesitated for a couple of seconds before offering him the candy. "Do you want one?" Alex declined my offer, so I felt no guilt as I popped the candy into my mouth. The sugar gave my dazed mind a bit of clarity, and I took the ice pack from him, thanking him politely and assuring him that I could handle it myself, not wanting to trouble him further. He didn't help me apply the medicine. But he didn't leave either. He just stood by the door, watching me. I pressed the ice pack to my face, and the searing heat on my cheek finally began to cool down. And with that, I finally had the mental space to really look at Alex. It had been 2 years since we last saw each other. In my memory, Alex was still the charming, dashing young heir of a wealthy family. I had imagined he might end up working in government, considering both of his parents held high positions there. But I never would have guessed that he would become a police officer. He was a bit sturdier, tanner, and even more charismatic than I remembered. Just standing there, he exuded an undeniable presence. I kept the ice on for about 10 minutes, and my right cheek had completely numbed. I then took out some alcohol and used the mirror on my phone to tend to the cut on my lip. Afterward, I stood up, put everything back in place, and handed it all back to Alex. "Thank you, sorry for the trouble." Finally, Alex spoke up, asking if I wanted to speak on behalf of my husband. Maybe, he said, he could consider going easy on him since we used to have a relationship. No need. In his situation, he'll be lucky if it's just 15 days in jail. You should handle it however you see fit. I still have to get back to work. If there's anything else, just call me. I tried to leave, but Alex blocked the doorway, preventing me from going. "Excuse me, could you please step aside?" I didn't look up as I said this. Alex stepped aside but kept his hand on the doorknob, asking me again, "Rachel, do you regret it?" I placed my hand on his, feeling him stiffen immediately. But I simply pressed down gently on his hand, pushing the door open. Alex, you can ask 100, 1,000 times. And I'll always give you the same answer. I don't regret breaking up with you, I don't regret marrying him, and I don't regret how things have turned out today. I went back to school as usual to teach my students, picking up a bread on the way and gulping it down to fill my stomach. It was summer vacation, so I had many students in my art classes. In order to make more money, I packed my schedule tightly. Even took on tutoring work. I often didn't even have time to eat. By the time I finished the last class, it was already 8 in the evening. I checked my phone and saw a screen full of missed calls from Amy. I knew she wasn't really that worried. She just needed someone to vent to. Taking a deep breath, I called her back. As expected, the moment the call connected, Amy began to unleash a tirade at me. She said I was heartless. That my husband had been brought into the police station, and yet I still had the nerve to go to work. She claimed that Mike had bad luck marrying me. I sat on a bench in the park, chewing on the last half of my bread while listening to her vent. She went on and on, finally telling me that she didn't want to see me recently and that I should stay away from home. After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, still staring at the phone. There was one last bite of bread in my hand, but it was so dry I couldn't swallow it. In the end, I had to throw it away. I ended up staying at my good friend Susan's place for a couple of days. She asked me what my plans were, and I told her I didn't have any, just get a divorce. Susan sighed. Since I got married, every time she talked to me, she urged me to get a divorce. But now that I was actually asking for one, she looked at me with a look of melancholy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I'll be celebrating your divorce with both hands up, Susan said, wrapping her arm around my shoulders and quietly leaning on me as we watched the night sky outside the window. I just don't get it. Why does all the suffering have to fall on you? You've been through so much, and there's nothing I can do to help. In the end, everything's something only you can bear. I smiled quietly, without a sound. You've already helped me a lot. When my mother was sick, she lent me all her savings and sent me money as soon as she got her paycheck. It was also her who introduced me to my current job, which increased my income significantly. Now that I had been kicked out and had nowhere to go, she took me in. I was really grateful, because even when I had lost everything, friendship was the one thing that held me up, preventing me from completely falling apart. Mike was locked up for a full 15 days. During that time, I found a new place and packed up my things. Life in the detention center wasn't easy for him, he lost quite a bit of weight. Amy specifically told me to make a big meal for him. While we were eating, in front of Mike's parents, I brought up the divorce. Amy was the first to oppose. You think you can just divorce him like that? Fine, but remember, you borrowed $100,000 from me for your mother's treatment when she was sick. You'll pay that back before you talk about divorce. Mike's father also frowned, clearly displeased. Couldn't you have waited until after dinner to bring this up? Mike, however, didn't react much. He just told me to draft a divorce agreement and split the assets. Amy immediately panicked, shouting, "Split assets? You've been eating my food and living in my house, and now you want to split my family's assets? I don't agree. Do you hear me? I don't agree." Mike impatiently looked up. Mom, can you keep quiet? This is between us. We'll make our own decisions. Amy stared at him in disbelief, immediately starting to tear up in a dramatic display. I quietly set down my chopsticks and interrupted her act. I'm definitely getting a divorce. The reason I'm saying it in front of you is to make everything clear. Since I married into this family, every cent of what I've spent, including my mother's medical bills, I'll return without missing a penny. Amy snorted disdainfully. Where are you getting that kind of money from? I'll borrow it. Don't worry, you won't lose out. Amy immediately became frantic. Your friends, like Susan, are all poor. Where will you borrow from? Rachel, admit it, have you been cheating on him? I forced myself to keep my emotions in check. Before I could respond, Amy threw her bowl at me. I'm asking you, have you been cheating? The dull pain was brief, but the oil and sauce from the bowl sticking to my hair made me uncomfortable. At the perfect moment, there was a knock on the door. The living room fell into silence. No one reacting. After a long pause, I calmly wiped my hair with a tissue and went to open the door. Alex and another female officer stood outside. I should feel ashamed. Since reconnecting with Alex, we've only met twice, and each time I was in a particularly awkward situation. But, deep down, I felt oddly calm. Perhaps it's because I've long recognized the difference between us, and I have no expectations from him. So I don't care what kind of image I present in front of him. The sudden appearance of the police officers broke the heavy atmosphere in the living room. The female officer, with all businesslike seriousness, flashed her badge and said, "We're here for a follow-up visit." She glanced at me and added, "Also, domestic violence is a crime. If Mike ends up here again, the penalty will be more severe." Amy forced a thin smile. "It's all a misunderstanding. I just accidentally knocked over a plate. It has nothing to do with my son." Seeing that the female officer didn't believe her, Amy tugged at Mike's father's sleeve, then turned to me and yelled, "Rachel, say something." "I have nothing to say," I replied, wiping the oil stain from my hair, then went to the bedroom to grab my suitcase. "Since we have two police officers here, let's settle the divorce matter right now. We can go straight to the notary office afterward." The female officer hesitated for a moment, looking back at Alex. Seeing his nod, she raised the law enforcement recorder in her hand. In front of the police, I carefully calculated my total expenditures over the years, including my mother's medical bills, and made it clear that I would return every penny. I also spoke about my years of marriage, the efforts I made, and the care I gave to the in-laws. I wasn't trying to gain sympathy, I simply wanted to make it clear that I don't owe Mike or his family anything. I was grateful to them for lending me money when my mother needed surgery and treatment, but if Mike hadn't made a fundamental mistake, I might have just kept going as I was. I've always known that ordinary people's lives are never easy, so when I faced hardships and injustice, I just gritted my teeth and pushed through. But now, I truly can't go on anymore. I need freedom, or I'll suffocate. Once everything was laid out in front of the police, and since Mike himself was willing to divorce me, Mike's parents couldn't stir up any trouble in the end. Even when we were scheduling the divorce date, Alex specifically mentioned that he would come that day as well. Immediately, everyone's eyes turned toward him except for mine. But Alex remained calm, even giving a slight warning as he tapped the table. "It's settled." With that, he stood up, grabbed my suitcase, and said he would see me off. From the surprised look of the female officer, it was clear that Alex wasn't usually this involved in his cases. I couldn't help but laugh at myself, if not for the fact that Alex and I had once been together. My divorce wouldn't have gone so smoothly. I had already prepared myself for a bitter showdown with Mike's family. As we got into the elevator, the female officer's phone rang. She stepped out to take the call, signaling for us to go downstairs first. So, the elevator now only held Alex and me. Alex still had a firm grip on my suitcase handle, quietly staring ahead. I stood in the corner of the elevator, looking down at the tips of my shoes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I heard Alex's voice and looked up, confused. I saw his hand tighten around the handle, his knuckles pressing out from the force. "Your mom needed money, why didn't you ask me?" I replied calmly, "Because you blocked my number. I couldn't reach you." Alex suddenly turned to face me, disbelief flashing across his face. It was the most emotional reaction I'd seen from him since we reconnected. The emotions in his eyes were too complicated for me to understand, and I didn't want to try. "Thank you for today," I said as the elevator stopped. I took my suitcase from him and stepped out. "Wait." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You need to explain." "That's all in the past," I said, pausing for a moment. "And whether or not I had money, it doesn't matter now. Sometimes, I can't help but wonder if the money Amy lent me extended my mother's life or simply prolonged her suffering. Alex wouldn't let go, seemingly wanting to say more. But when he saw my expression, he stopped, stunned, and slowly released his hold. Lately, I've often felt numb to life. But no matter how much I try to shut myself off, some sadness still breaks through the numb facade, stubbornly making its way out. After a moment, I added, "You don't need to feel guilty toward me. Even though you blocked me, we were classmates. If I truly wanted to contact you, I could have." In the end, I couldn't bear to see the regret on his face. It wasn't that I still held on to old feelings for him, but I had been feeling so tired lately and didn't want to carry anyone else's guilt. On my first night in the new apartment, Susan bought some alcohol to celebrate the start of my new life. She said now that I was free of burdens and my work was going well, everything would get better from here on out. We clinked our glasses in front of the beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows, laughing and drinking one bottle of beer after another. As the night went on, I drank more than I should have. Drowsy, I leaned back against the sofa, squinting at the overhead lights. And for a moment, I was lost in thought, remembering the past. I met Alex through the student council in college. We had to handle things together often, and as we spent more time together, it only made sense that we ended up as a couple. At the beginning, the story was nothing but sweetness. He was my first love. And someone I had seriously considered spending my life with. I included him in my future plans. Even though we hadn't been dating long, I sought Susan's advice and tried my best to nurture this relationship. We had some truly sweet moments together. Until one time, we were out on a date and walked past a bridal shop. I linked my arm with Alex's, pointed at the elaborate wedding dresses in the window, and smiled as I asked, "Should we come here to try one on when we get married? I think they're pretty." At that point, we had just graduated, and I felt our relationship was stable enough to start thinking about the next step. He just smiled casually, without responding. In that moment, I suddenly realized that maybe, in Alex's mind, he had never thought about marrying me. It was me, being presumptuous, thinking that once people dated, they would eventually consider marriage. Susan once told me that my personality had its pros and cons. I tend to throw myself into things, which is great for school and work, but when it came to relationships, being so serious often led to hurt. I was down for a while, unsure if Alex had picked up on my feelings, and things started to feel a little awkward between us. I probably put too much pressure on him, because it was clear that he just wanted to enjoy the moment. We gradually began to drift apart. He had his circle of Susans, and I had my own life. But I still went to his birthday. At that time, he wasn't yet a police officer, but he always paid attention to his appearance. I had saved up money for a long time and bought him a pair of ear-bone studs. He accepted them, casually saying thanks, and then placed my gift among the pile of gift boxes. He had many Susans, so there were plenty of people at his birthday party. But we were still a couple back then, and I thought that at least my gift should mean something special to him. But it didn't. He didn't treat me any differently, and my gift didn't seem to bring him any joy. That's when a thought crossed my mind. Maybe we should break up. But I quickly calmed myself. Breaking up wasn't something to take lightly, and I needed to find a good time to talk to him about it. But I never got that chance. At his birthday party, Alex's good friend Anna kissed him in front of everyone. I knew it was a message to me. She must have sensed something was off between Alex and me. And now she was getting a little bold. I didn't want to judge Anna's actions on whether they were moral or not. What mattered to me was that Alex didn't push her away. So, in front of everyone, I threw a glass of wine at Alex and walked out. Alex reached for me, so I slapped him. The party ended in silence, and the next day, Alex left the country. Maybe he was just in a bad mood and needed a break. Of course, Anna went with him. After that, we never saw each other again. I don't really think there's anything left for me to regret about my relationship with Alex. Maybe we had misunderstandings, maybe we missed our chances, but even if those things hadn't happened, we still wouldn't have ended up together. We just weren't from the same world. Susan asked me the same question Alex did. She asked me if I had any regrets. My answer was the same, never. After moving out and living alone, my life became simple and routine. I woke up on time, went to class, and came home. I hadn't lived this peacefully and comfortably in a long time. It felt like I was a wild grass finally breaking free from the soil, stretching its limbs. I was working hard to make money. My schedule was packed from morning to night, with hardly any time for rest. When Susan came to visit me at school, I only had a few minutes between classes to chat. I asked her what she needed. She didn't say much, just handed me a bank card. I froze. "What are you doing?" "I'm not unaware of your financial situation," Susan said bluntly, pushing the card into my hand. "Take it." The money I spent from my mother's illness to her passing was far more than $100,000. At that time, I had just graduated and didn't have much income. I didn't have time for a part-time job because I was taking care of my mother, so I ended up borrowing quite a bit of money. After I started working again, I focused on earning money. Just recently, I had paid off all my debts. But I certainly couldn't afford to pay back Mike's family. I hadn't planned to borrow money from Susan. She had just bought a house not long ago and was also under financial pressure. So, I had already decided to apply for a loan from the bank. My salary over the past year was decent, so I figured I'd be approved. "The password is your birthday," Susan said, knowing I was busy. She didn't say much more, just waved and left. I frowned, taking the card and putting it away. On my way home that evening, I passed by the bank and decided to check the balance at the ATM. There was $300,000 in the account. I immediately started to have some suspicions, so I called Susan. "This card, it's not yours, is it?" Susan didn't directly admit it. She laughed. "What, you don't trust me?" I smiled. "Because you couldn't possibly have 300,000 right now." She muttered, "What? There's 300,000 in it? He's really generous." Then she confessed, "Alex came to see me a few days ago, asked about you, and gave me this card. He said it was money he owed you and asked me to give it to you. But not to tell you it came from him, or you'd never accept it. I feel like he really does owe you a lot. So I took it for you." I sighed. Susan said matter-of-factly, "Just take it. He's too ashamed to face you. You might as well do something good, let him spend some money to feel better. And don't even think about returning it to him." "I'm not giving it back." I honestly didn't expect Alex to go to Susan. He's a proud man, and he's not one to humble himself easily. I guess when he met Susan, he had to endure some sarcasm. And maybe he'd had enough of it. I thought for a moment and, when I got home, I arranged for a courier to send the card directly to the police station. I addressed it to Alex's name. I thought everything was over by then, because I remember Alex isn't the type to chase after people endlessly. But the package was returned, it had been refused. I didn't have Alex's contact information. Susan probably did. But she definitely wouldn't give it to me. I could probably reach him through some former classmates, but I didn't think it was necessary. So I just put the card in my wallet, intending to return it when the time was right. The day I was supposed to meet my husband at the notary for the divorce soon arrived. He showed up on time, holding a pile of documents. Alex didn't come, instead, it was another police officer. Someone with thick brows and a steady gaze. When he saw me, he gave me a wide grin, then sat at a distance, not interrupting me and my husband. We silently waited in line, signed the papers, and watched the divorce certificate being handed to us. "The money should be transferred next week," I said to Mike. "The bank's approval takes some time. Without the divorce, my loan would count as joint debt. Which wouldn't be fair to him." Mike casually shoved the divorce certificate into his pocket and said to me, "You don't have to pay it back. I already transferred the 100,000 to my mom. Consider it paid." I stared at him in disbelief. "No. Why not? Just think of it as me owing you." I looked at him for a long time. Then couldn't help but laugh. He asked me what I was laughing at. I shook my head and said it was nothing. I just didn't understand why they all said they owed me. If they felt they owed me, why didn't they try harder to make this marriage work in the first place? At that thought, I suddenly became curious and asked a question I hadn't planned to ask. "Have you always hated me?" My ex-husband looked at me in surprise. "Hate you? Then why would I marry you?" I opened my mouth, unsure of what to say. "I actually quite like you," my ex-husband said, his expression calm. "I thought it would be you who hated me, since you were practically forced to be with me back then." I shook my head. "You don't know how grateful I am to you." "You probably only feel grateful to me," he said. "After all, my mom's always treated you badly." As we walked out of the notary office, I looked at the long staircase and then turned around, seriously meeting his gaze. "Do you really think that all I feel for you is gratitude?" He froze, staring at me, and couldn't make a sound for a long time. I always knew Mike didn't have much affection for me. He didn't like me. The first time we went on a date, it was because his family kept pushing him to meet me, and he reluctantly went along just to get it over with. Later, when we got married, it wasn't because of love but because I met his criteria for a partner: graduate from a prestigious university, good-looking, well-spoken, considerate, and caring. His family wasn't extremely wealthy, but they were comfortable. His parents had bought him a house with full cash long before. His job was stable, and he was more than capable of supporting himself. So, he didn't mind that I had a sick mother. At first, Amy was also pleased with me. She said my mother's medical bills were a gift from them, no need to pay back, and they wouldn't inquire about a thing. So, my marriage to Mike made sense. He married a wife everyone liked, and I got my mother's treatment fees. But we never truly knew each other. After we got married, I moved in with him, but most of the time, I was still at the hospital. He continued his usual routine, going to work as normal. When I cooked for my mother, I would set aside a portion for him, and to show appreciation, Mike would occasionally join me to visit my mother. My mother knew our marriage was rushed, and she was always worried about how I would cope. To reassure her, Mike would pretend to be a loving husband. Even when my mother passed away, and I was too poor to manage, Mike took the initiative to transfer me some money. He said, "At least we were married. There's no need to be too formal." At that time, I truly only felt gratitude for him. The real change in my feelings came after my mother's death. For a long time, I was engulfed in a boundless loneliness that I couldn't escape. Every morning, I tried to pull myself together and keep going, but every time, I failed. Mike's life went on as usual, but one day, he suddenly said he wanted to go camping. He invited a bunch of friends, and the atmosphere was lively. I felt out of place and didn't want to spoil everyone's fun, so I moved a chair and sat alone in the dark, away from the light. Mike came over at some point, sitting next to me. He kept adjusting his posture, looking a bit restless, and I jokingly told him to go find his friends. Not to worry about me. He hesitated for a long time before asking if I had ever heard a story. It was the one about how every person we deeply love turns into a star in the sky after they pass away. He wasn't good at comforting others, his tone was awkward, and his gestures were stiff. I couldn't see his expression, but I could tell it was probably just as awkward as his words. For some reason, I suddenly understood. The chilly autumn wind was beginning to bite, so I stood up, stamped my feet a little, pulled my jacket's zipper up to the top, and looked at him seriously. "Mike, let's live a good life from now on." He didn't respond. "Let's work hard and build our marriage." I'm a serious person. When I was in love, I gave it my all. Now that I was married, I was still all in. Mike and I didn't have a foundation of love, but that was fine. Marriage and love are different. He didn't love me, but he wasn't a bad person at his core, and that was enough. So even though Amy's attitude towards me changed drastically, even though I faced some difficulties in this marriage, I still believed we could make it work. I hoped this marriage would last a long time. After all, even though the beginning of the story wasn't perfect, I still wanted a happy ending. I don't know what Mike really felt about me during these 2 years of marriage. It's true that he generously offered his help when I was in trouble. It's also true that he awkwardly tried to comfort me when I was in pain. But it's just as true that he ignored the hardships I faced in our marriage, and the betrayal was real too. So I think he's probably just a person whose nature isn't entirely bad. Someone with a certain amount of morality and conscience. But men's morality and conscience are often unpredictable, only coming into play at certain moments. Before leaving, Mike asked if I wanted a hug. When he saw I didn't move, he gave a self-deprecating smile and said, "Never mind." I thought for a moment. Then stepped forward and hugged him lightly. We were once married. But we rarely had such intimate contact without any sexual undertones. So even though it was such a simple gesture, both of us felt a little awkward. Mike bent down to hold me, his breath quick for a second, then soon returned to normal. In the end, he just patted my head lightly, smiling as he said, "Rachel, I'm sorry." I wonder what exactly he was apologizing for. But I knew he wouldn't explain it to me. That day, I was sent to school in a police car. After parting with Mike, I didn't even have time to wait for the bus back to school before a police car stopped in front of me. The officer who had been quietly accompanying me throughout the divorce process smiled and waved at me, saying he was giving me a ride. I hesitated for 2 seconds. Then got in. He introduced himself and explained that Alex had something to do today, so he'd come in his place. There was really no need for this, knowing Mike's nature. Once he agreed to the divorce, he wouldn't change his mind. Still, I thanked him for making the trip and bought some sweets for him to take back to the police station to share with his colleagues. It was my way of thanking them for protecting me the last time I was slapped at the station. I also handed the officer a small bag to pass on to Alex. He noticed the curiosity in his eyes, so I smiled and told him it was candy. Carrying candy was the only habit I inherited from Alex. I used to have low blood sugar. And after I started spending time with Alex, he not only carried candy with him but would occasionally slip a piece into my bag. The officer mentioned that sometimes they worked around the clock on cases, so Alex probably needed candy now too. Of course, besides the candy, the bag also contained a bank card. This time, the card was finally not returned to me. I thought that this was the end of my relationship with Alex. We would go our separate ways, living different lives on different paths. Until one day, I discovered signs that someone had been to my parents' graves. A bunch of flowers, almost withered, a pair of candles burned out, and dozens of apples in different colors, sizes, and varieties. I remembered when Alex and I used to go grocery shopping. Passing the fruit section, I casually mentioned that my mother loved apples. If there's ever a chance, I hope she can try every kind of apple in the world. Alex had jokingly replied, "Then I'll send your mother a big gift of apples as a greeting when we meet." I crouched by the grave, picked up one of the apples, fragrant and golden, and tears unexpectedly began to flow. I didn't understand why I felt so sad. After all, I was finally truly free now. Maybe it was because there were so many things I didn't get to say, so many things I didn't get to do. Even after so long, when I think about it, it still feels like such a regret. Days passed by, one after another. At the end of the year, I received news that the professor who had been kind to me during college was ill. Everyone was planning to visit him and catch up. I declined the gathering, intending to visit privately, but unexpectedly, the classmates changed the meeting location at the last minute. And I ran into them at the hospital. They were all classmates I had gotten along well with in college. A few of them had even helped me when they found out about my difficult situation, so when they invited me again, I didn't refuse. On the way to the restaurant, my friend Lily, who had been close to me, privately reminded me that Alex might also be attending the dinner. They had all heard the news of my breakup with Alex. Although they didn't know the reasons, they were worried that it might be awkward if we ran into each other again. I smiled and told her that he probably wouldn't come. She nodded and didn't ask further. The dinner was lively, with toasts exchanged several times. I didn't have a high tolerance for alcohol. And after a small drink, I started feeling a bit dizzy. I struggled to keep my composure and told the female classmates next to me that my place was far, and to help me book a room at the hotel next door. Then the dizziness hit harder. There was a lot of noise around me, and I could feel Lily helping me onto the couch, letting me rest semi-reclined. I curled up, half closing my eyes, not asleep but not fully awake either. I don't know how much time passed, but suddenly, someone crouched down in front of me. He raised his hand, tucked my messy hair behind my ear, and his palm lightly brushed across my cheek. I heard others greet him, calling him Alex. Lily came over, and I vaguely heard her say to Alex, she had just a little. But she's already drunk. She asked me to help her book a room next door. No need. She won't sleep well at the hotel. I'll take her home. Alex paused, then added, she won't remember this when she wakes up, so if she asks tomorrow, just tell her you were on the way and gave her a ride home. Alex was lying. If I were drunk, I wouldn't forget everything, but I was very much awake. Still, I reached out and grabbed Alex's shirt, struggling to focus my blurry eyes on him. Alex seemed to mutter, "Little drunkard," before lifting me up. Leaving the noisy room, the surroundings became quiet. Alex's steps were steady, not the slightest bit bumpy. But I still furrowed my brow and told him, "Alex, I feel sick." He quickened his pace and gently placed me in the passenger seat, reclining the seat and fastening my seatbelt. After doing all this, he didn't close the car door. I opened my eyes, dazed, and stared at him. He just silently gazed back at me. "Alex," I asked, "are you avoiding me?" He didn't answer, only asking, "Do you want to see me?" I couldn't answer. Then he smiled and said, "It's okay, it's normal that you don't want to see me." He added, "Anyway, you won't remember me tomorrow. Let me stay with you a little longer, okay?" I shook my head, saying no. Alex nodded, "All right. Then I'll take you home now." I tilted my head, staring intently at Alex as he drove. I used to love watching him drive, I thought it was so sexy. He still had the same features I liked, and someone who once left a special mark in my life would always be special to me. At a red light, he glanced at me and asked if I was still feeling unwell and if I wanted some water. I didn't want water. I just weakly asked, "Alex, why didn't you answer my calls?" The smile on his face gradually faded, and an undeniable sadness surfaced in his eyes. "Alex, I really missed you back then. I wish you were here with me." I had never felt inferior about my background, but in that moment, I clearly realized that the only thing separating me from him was just a passport. That alone was enough to create a gap between us. I continued, "At that time, Mom had to get so many injections. And they took so much blood. In the end, she became so thin, just skin and bones." I raised my hand and made a small circle with my fingers. She was in so much pain. I tried so many ways to stop her pain, but nothing worked. She couldn't bear to leave me, so she wouldn't close her eyes. So I told her I would be fine. That she didn't need to worry. But I wasn't fine, not at all. I was so scared. I was always scared. But I didn't cry. I was strong. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I promised my mother that I would live well, no matter what. So I gritted my teeth, kept my head down, and, despite being terrified, I pushed forward. Alex looked at me for a long time, his eyes filled with such deep sadness that it nearly overflowed. Eventually, The tears gathered, one by one, and slid down his cheeks. He shakily reached out and stroked my face, again and again, his voice cracking as he apologized. His emotions were so intense that I felt overwhelmed, and I waved at him. He gently leaned closer to me, and I whispered, "Can you hold me? Hold me, Alex. This journey has been so hard for me." The next day, I woke up to bright daylight. After a moment of confusion, my mind quickly cleared. And I realized I was lying in my own bedroom. Strange. I remembered drinking too much last night. I should have asked Lily to help me book a hotel room. How did they know where I live? I rubbed my temples as I sat up and walked out of my room. I was startled by how tidy the living room was, so clean it could almost be a mirror. I didn't think I had the habit of cleaning the house after drinking, did I? While I was still thinking, Alex suddenly walked out of the kitchen, wearing my apron. Our eyes met, and Alex spoke first. "Breakfast is on the table. I have some things at the police station, so I'm going to work now." I replied stiffly, standing there, watching as Alex took off the apron and walked to the door to change his shoes. I thought for a moment, then said, "Thanks for taking care of me last night." Alex paused for a second. "No need to thank me. Did I say anything to you last night?" I asked carefully. My intuition told me that if I hadn't said something, Alex would never have let me see him again. The sound of keys jangling in his hand seemed to hide some unspoken emotion. After a long while, he casually said, "You promised me you'd let me pursue you again." I remained dazed, not snapping out of it until Alex had left for quite some time. My first reaction was to check the security footage in my house. For safety reasons, I had set up a camera in the corner of the living room, and now it finally came in handy. In the footage, I saw Alex carrying me into the house and placing me on the sofa. He took off my shoes and socks. I wasn't cooperating, struggling the whole time, muttering how uncomfortable I felt. Alex could only cradle my calves to keep me still. I couldn't break free, so I mumbled softly, "Alex, you're so annoying, just go." "I don't want to go." "But you already left," I said through tears. "Once you leave, don't come back." Alex was facing away from the camera, so I couldn't see his expression. "You need to remember," I said seriously, "despite my drunkenness, I'm the one who left you. Not the other way around." In some sense, Alex was the only one I'd ever actively let go of, even when there was still a chance for a future. It was something so unlike me, the kind of person who never gave up. As Susan had once said, "When I'm drunk, I'm usually quiet and well-behaved, but when it comes to Alex, I become willful." For me, Alex had every special place in my heart, including all my hidden ways of being spoiled. I kept mumbling complaints about Alex, but he remained silent. He was quiet as he removed my makeup, wiped me down, and was about to carry me to the bedroom when I suddenly grabbed his collar. Caught off guard, I kissed him. Alex froze for a moment, then immediately held the back of my head and deepened the kiss. Watching the footage almost made me jump up in disbelief. I couldn't believe I'd done that while drunk. After what felt like an eternity, Alex carefully held me in his arms and, in a hoarse voice, asked, "Can I try to win you back? Will you leave again this time?" "I won't leave. No matter what happens, I won't leave." I heard myself mumble in my half-dreamy state, nodding in agreement, saying yes. In that moment, I finally realized that maybe I had never really gotten over Alex. I had been holding on to it for so long. But subconsciously, I thought, what could I do? Things have already gone this far. So I thought if it was over, then I should just let it go. But Alex, he was so annoying. He walked away on his own, yet now he wanted to come back. With that pitiful look on his face, I couldn't bring myself to reject him. My mind was a complete mess. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to take back what I said, but my heart seemed unwilling. So I called Susan. She was a love expert and my strategist. She wasn't surprised at all by what I said, looking like it was exactly what she had expected. If you still like him, then be with him. But what's there to hesitate about? Let me tell you something. The moment Alex reached out to me, I knew you two would definitely get back together. Susan laughed. Do you really think I'd just take anyone's bank card? I let out a bitter laugh. How could you be so sure we'll get back together? She was even more certain than I was. Because you never stopped loving him, and all I ever wanted was for you to be happy, Susan said softly. Rachel, be brave enough to go after what you truly want. Don't be afraid of getting hurt. I'll always have your back. I felt so lucky to have a friend like her. That afternoon, I decided to go to the police station. When I got to the entrance, I called Alex. He practically ran out, as if a second's delay might mean I'd vanish. When we saw each other, I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off urgently. Don't say anything. Let me talk first. You've always been the one to give me an out. This time, let me take the initiative. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling deeply, then looked at me with unwavering seriousness. Rachel, let's be together. This time, we'll never part again. We both knew it probably shouldn't happen this quickly. But clearly, neither of us could wait. We had been apart for so long. All we wanted now was to rush into each other's arms and give ourselves a rightful title. So I looked at him with equal seriousness and nodded softly. Okay, let's be together. From now, until forever. The end. The end. The end. The end. The end. The end.